Now that we are more familiar with the structures that are found within the skeletal muscle cells and the structures that are specifically found within the sarcomere, we are ready to see how muscles actually shorten. And we're going to start off that topic, or we're going to start that conversation by looking at how muscles are signaled to contract, or how muscles are stimulated to contract. That is, what is the stimulus that's causing muscle contraction in the first place, right? So what signals skeletal muscles to contract? So recall that the body has two organ systems that are designed to send internal signals. That is, these are organ systems that are relaying signals from one organ system to another. That is, they're generating these signals, and other organ systems are responding accordingly. So that is, these two organ systems are creating the stimulus, or the signals that are actually causing changes within the body, right? The first of those organ systems was the endocrine system, right? So recall that the endocrine system is a series of glands, and these glands are associated with blood vessels, and they release these chemical messengers that we call hormones into the blood. The problem with the endocrine system, well, not really the problem, just kind of the general characteristics of the endocrine system, is that this method of signaling is very slow. So releasing a chemical messenger into the blood, it takes time for this chemical messenger to get to its target organ or organ system, because it essentially has to go through the blood, just kind of going where the blood takes it. And so eventually it will get there, but it's not the most direct route of signaling, right? And then we also had the nervous system, right? So recall that the nervous system uses specialized cells that we call neurons to create these electrical and chemical signals. And so electrical signals travel very rapidly through these cells, or I should say across the cell of the nervous system, the neuron. And that electrical signal results in the release of this chemical signal called a neurotransmitter. And this is very fast. The nervous system is able to send messages directly to a target organ within hundredths of a second. So it's less than 1 second signaling time, so much less than 1 second signaling time. So this is a very fast mechanism to directly communicate and directly send signals to the organ system of interest, right? So it's primarily the nervous system that's going to be sending signals to cause skeletal muscles to contract. Okay, so let's look at some basic anatomy of the cells of the nervous system that are actually accomplishing this. So we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but hopefully this will be, by the time we get to this in Chapter 11, this will be a little bit of review for you. So the basic signaling cell of the nervous system is called the neuron. So this is the basic cell that is going to be creating those electrical and chemical signals that are the stimulus for our skeletal muscles. Okay. Specifically, neurons that make a connection, or what we call a synapse, to a skeletal muscle are referred to as motor neurons. So think motor as in this is connecting to something that's producing movement, so the muscles are producing movement, right? The neurons are typically found in the brain and the spinal cord. That is, this is kind of the main cell body of the neuron here, and these are found housed kind of safely within the brain and the spinal cord, because the brain and the spinal cord are very well protected by bone. So typically the cell bodies of these cells are found there. But because the skeletal muscles that these cells are signaling aren't necessarily in close proximity to the brain and the spinal cord, the motor neurons make use of these extremely long structures that come off of the main cell body called the axon. And so they send these very long axons directly to specific muscles in the body. And so they directly make a direct connection with the muscle that they're controlling. And so they make use of these very long axons. And these axons can sometimes be 2 to 3 feet long. So these are very long structures, very long cells. We're probably familiar with this term nerve, but we haven't yet kind of anatomically described it yet. So when the nervous system sends many axons to a specific muscle, they send them as a bundle. And typically this bundle is referred to as a nerve. So a nerve is simply a bundle of lots of these axons that are going to a specific place within the body. Okay. So what does this what does this look like here? So we've got our central nervous system here. In this case, is a diagram of the spinal cord here. And we have two neurons, one in red and one in purple, and the cell bodies of them are housed safely within the protected spinal cord, because the spinal cord is protected by the vertebral column. And so it's sending these very long axons out as nerves. And these axons are making connections, or what we call synapses, to individual skeletal muscle cells or fibers here. So each of these sort of long rod-like structures that you see here is an individual skeletal muscle cell. Okay, so we have the axons of our neurons here, and they're making synapses or connections with our muscle fibers. Okay, and I've already given you this term here. The synapse is simply referring to the junction between the neuron and the skeletal muscle fiber itself. So this is what we're going to look at next. We're going to look a little bit more detail at the structures that are found at the synapse and what they're doing. So we're kind of getting set up for how neurons are signaling skeletal muscle cells. Okay. Specifically, the synapse between a skeletal muscle and a neuron is called the neuromuscular junction. Okay, so that's kind of the more specific term that we use for this kind of connection. A synapse generally refers to when a neuron connects with another cell, so it's kind of a general term describing the connection of one neuron to another cell. The neuromuscular junction specifically describes the synapse between the skeletal muscle and the neuron itself. At the end of the neuron, so we've got our axon here, and it kind of branches off a little bit and makes synapses or neuromuscular junctions with this particular muscle cell here. So this is just one skeletal muscle cell that we're seeing in this diagram. So we're looking at essentially a coronal section of it. We kind of cut through it, and we're looking internally now. And what you see is that the axon, it expands a little bit. That is, it has a little bit of an expanded or wide end of it, and we call that end the axon terminal. And this axon terminal houses some very important structures that are necessary in signaling the skeletal muscle cell. And here we have the sarcolemma. So this is, again, just the term for the plasma membrane of our skeletal muscle cell here. So nothing new here, just looking at it in a slightly different perspective. And then in here, because we've essentially made a section, a coronal section through these, or transverse section, I'm not really sure what direction this was, but we've made a section through this cell, and we're looking at the internal part of it. So this would be the intracellular environment of our muscle cell here. Okay. So looking within the synaptic terminal, or the axon terminal itself, we see these small sort of bubble-like structures that are containing some substance here, and the substance that it's indicating here is the neurotransmitter. So this is the chemical signal that the nervous system releases in order to signal other cells. I mentioned that the nervous system makes electrical signals, and the electrical signals in the nervous system don't arc like a spark plug from one cell to another. So the electrical signal in the nervous system cell is used to release these chemical signals. So it's actually these chemical signals that are communicating with our next cell here. Okay. So more specifically, just kind of looking at the neurotransmitter here, there are somewhere around 50 known neurotransmitters. There's a good variety of transmitters. Some of them are chemicals, some of them are gases, some of them are amino acids and things like that. So there's a good variety of known neurotransmitters. There's only one neurotransmitter, though, that actually signals skeletal muscle cells to contract. And that specific neurotransmitter is called acetylcholine or acetylcholine. You can pronounce it either way, but either way, I prefer the term acetylcholine. But either way, this is the only neurotransmitter that is found at the neuromuscular junction between skeletal muscle cells and neurons. Okay, so this is the only chemical signal that's released by the nervous system to signal these cells. Okay, what's not really too apparent here, or too obvious in this particular diagram here, is that there is actually a small gap between the axon terminal here and the sarcolemma of our skeletal muscle cell. And that gap is specifically called the synaptic cleft. And this synaptic cleft is fluid-filled. That is, it's essentially filled with extracellular fluid. So it's filled with mostly water, which is really important because the neurotransmitter is a chemical signal. So it needs a fluid environment in order to diffuse across this gap, that is across this small space, and make contact with these receptors that are on our skeletal muscle cells. So a fluid-filled space is necessary for the movement of the neurotransmitter from one cell to the next.